Oh. Hello. Hello and welcome. I've got a little bit of an ants problem, or termites. I'm not sure what they are. They're very tiny things. And, well, they seem to have come in en masse, motorwaying around me at the moment. Hello. Because it's raining, maybe, that's why they've come in. Anyway, we'll try and carry on. Thank you for your patience. It seems that they might well be also climbing all over the camera, or the phone, as it is. So if you get a bit of interference, just please understand it's these poor little creatures trying to get shelter from the rain outside. But it's literally a sea of black over there, extending its way in very neat formation to over here. I'm not sure whether indeed you can see that. I can barely see it. So moving straight on with your comments and your questions, the first question today is one of two, I think, one of two, or maybe even three. How do you actually practice equanimity? Is it just reminding yourself, that's better, reminding yourself that things are out of your control and there is no point suffering when bad things happen? Or is there a particular practice? Equanimity is a quality. The Pali word is upekkha. It's the fourth of the four Brahma Viharas. Through the practice of maintaining moral virtue, sila, the precepts, practicing meditation, samadhi, and developing wisdom, wholesome mind states, whilst reducing unwholesome mind states, we develop all these qualities. So it isn't a practice in itself, it's a quality we have developed from the practice, which leads to an understanding that all things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and out of our control. Yes, so indeed you do answer the question yourself there. It's that understanding, but not something we do. We develop that quality. How does one actually, as I'm trying to equanimously sit here at the moment, whilst the motorway of these little creatures extends around me, but whether that equanimity will remain if they choose to shortcut over me, we shall only see. But I think not. I think they're staying this way. It's quite amazing to see, and I'm really curious as to know what is causing it. There's no source of food in here, you see, which is what would normally bring them in, unless of course the cat has brought something in on her paws, but I don't think so. It's never happened before. The second question: how does one actually see, brackets, do, close brackets, or see, open brackets, do vipassana, close brackets, after having a suitable degree of samadhi? Does one just contemplate the three characteristics of existence in different phenomena? Again, yes, vipassana is developing a quality. It is not something we do. Sometimes when translated as insight, or even a practice, insight meditation, vipassana meditation. It's understood that sitting and meditating is what gives you the clear understanding of anicca, impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and anatta, not self. And, well, developing samadhi, the power of concentration of the mind, and in turn samatha, a peace and tranquil, calm state of mind. Two different words, you'll see: samadhi, concentration; samatha, tranquility, peace and calm. This practice helps you establish more mindfulness in all of your daily activities. So having finished samadhi, having finished sitting meditation, having developed concentrated state of mind, a peaceful and calm state of mind, you will have a heightened sense of awareness about all you encounter and all you see, as you explain, and therefore a greater understanding through seeing clearly, actually seeing clearly, the nature of all things, the nature of existence, that anicca, dukkha, anatta. So we develop samadhi in order to sharpen the tools, sharpen the mind, in order that when we go out into all our daily activities using that tool, using those tools, we have sharpness and accuracy. So it's like when we sit in samadhi, we're sharpening a knife. And then when we go out into our daily activities, we are presented with a tomato to slice. Now, if our knife is blunt and we try to slice the tomato, we just encounter a horrible, mushy mess. But if we've sharpened our acuity, our minds, our focus through samadhi, and we can slice smoothly and easily through a tomato, finely, then you'll see the difference. And this is the nature of our practice. This is how we develop insight. Vipassana, which means to see clearly. In reality, whatever you might understand Vipassana to be, it just means seeing clearly. However, it's used as a word in different conventions and ideologies and philosophies, then that's, in that context. But outside of that context, the common understanding of what the word means, the Pali word translated into English, is simply to see clearly. So it isn't in fact a practice in itself, but again a quality one develops from the practice of samadhi. And Rosie, you don't like these things on the floor either, do you? How can we move without accidentally, well, we can step over this neat motorway, but it's very hard not to damage these things. While meditating, if one starts to enjoy it more, is that a sign of progress? Well, certainly. If you are enjoying your meditation, it means you've got rid of one of the 5 hindrances, the second of the 5 hindrances, ill will or aversion, at least ill will or aversion to the meditation itself. It also means that perhaps you're more comfortable physically, and therefore you're also more comfortable emotionally, mentally. So any significant or any sign of enjoyment or contentment, happiness in meditation is not something to be grasped onto, attached to, because it too is impermanent and therefore would lead to suffering. But whilst present, to be appreciated as something you can enjoy. So I'm not sitting meditating at the moment, but I'm very much enjoying the fact that I'm sitting here. I'm really quite unable to move because I'm talking to you, and I also don't want to disturb Rosie, who's sitting on my lap. And whilst this isn't meditation, I'm enjoying the comfort of sitting in this posture and the mental relaxation coming about from that comfortable posture, knowing also that I don't have to be concerned about moving into what is externally surrounding me, this moat, this sea of termites and ants. That is when the suffering will begin again. But in the meantime, by sitting here in meditation or just talking to you, I'm developing equanimity towards that, getting used to my surrounding, ever-changing and new environment that I'm seeing unfold before me, to go about dealing with it equanimously later on. Not worrying about how that's going to be dealt with later on now, but developing the quality of equanimity and enjoyment in the present moment here and now, so as I'm better able and better geared up towards dealing with it later, which will merely mean, I think, putting the fan on and hoping that that interrupts the flow of things and dries the air out a little bit and makes them want to go elsewhere. You might be able to see how they're collecting around the bowl stand. In fact, on the bowl stand, which is a ratana woven affair. Wow, something they want in here, isn't there? That they can't find out there. Fascinating. Some of the smaller creatures in nature are just as fascinating as the larger creatures in nature. Because you get a better perspective. When you see an elephant, you see an elephant, and maybe a herd of elephants from a distance. But when you see something like these tiny termites, you're seeing a whole community, a whole society, well, a whole species almost unfold before your very eyes, doing its ultimate aim is the same, because they're all going in the same direction and returning from the same direction in a very organised team-like fashion. And that's much how us beings, human beings, must look like from above. Now, I'm sure for them it's all very, very busy down there and very hectic. But like ourselves, in a traffic jam and in society, in a big city like Delhi or Mumbai or London or Paris or Rome, everything all going on, all very busy and hectic. But when you look at it from above, it's just lots of little ants like this moving gracefully in a flow. We're all part of that flow. And when we can just put some distance between being there and viewing it from an external point of view, and what better way to see that as an example is this, then we just give our chance to establish that moment of something separate, awareness, but moving some little bit of distance away from it, to examine it more carefully and appreciate it for what it is. Again, impermanent, albeit can be unsatisfactory. If it's enjoyable, it might lead to unsatisfaction if you grasp on, cling on, attach to that enjoyment. But these examples in life are there, and lessons that we learn. This is how we come to see clearly, really appreciate Vipassana, seeing clearly in all our daily activities. You don't all have to come and sit on the floor in a wet sort of jungly environment and be eaten by termites. Not that I'm being eaten, not yet, are we, Rosie? Okay. I have a question. I do have a question about money. You mentioned when you're at the airport you have a sugary drink if feeling faint. Who buys you that? And where do you get food from when travelling to non-Buddhist countries? Normally speaking, when I'm travelling, people will come up and talk to me, and they'll always say, can I get you anything? Even if they're not formally offering me anything, people just generally do. So I don't eat in the afternoon, and often people want to offer me something and I say I don't eat in the afternoon. They'll say, can I get you a sugary drink? Or not specifically those words, do you want a Coke or a coffee or tea or something like that, whatever happens to be around. So, you know, generally speaking, someone will offer such a thing. Or indeed, I've been given something earlier, and although we can't store food overnight, we can keep a hold of a drink until dawn the following morning. So if someone gave you a fruit juice or a soda drink of some kind, a sweet soda drink of some kind, as monks that's been offered, we can keep that and we can consume it any time from then until dawn the following day, when it then has to be either given away or re-offered by someone else. But usually you've had that drink. So usually it's what I've got on my person. And as far as travelling in non-Buddhist countries is concerned, I do exactly the same. I go out in the morning with my bowl and hope for the best. And invariably, in fact in some senses just as much, people will come up, they have an inquisitive nature, but also are kind-hearted, and will generally speaking ask you some questions. What are you doing? Why do you look like that? If it's really somewhere that hasn't heard or seen Buddhism, which is very few places these days. But yeah, it's the same. It's never a problem. I'm not really traveling so much these days, but I was in India for 3 years. It is not a Buddhist country. I wasn't necessarily in non-Buddhist areas. But there's an alternative. One can go to prasad at Hindu temples, which is what I often did, I did on a regular basis for some time, where you could go, it was before noon, before 12. I simply went, not with my bowl, but I'd just go and sit with the rest of the people and have food offered to me in that sense. There's still food being offered, and it's still before noon. And it was very good food too. So simple, rice and dal, and some sort of sweet stuff afterwards. It was sufficient. A few vegetables, not much, but it was enough to keep me going. So you just make do. You can always survive. We need very little. We eat very little. How can we let go of the desire for focus on the breath while still being intent on focusing on it? We let go of the desire for focus on the breath. So it's okay to have a good intention. I wouldn't call that desire. You're going to be breathing anyway, so it's not desire for the breath. Desire to keep focused attention on the breath is merely good intention. There are two kinds of desire. Tanha, craving or thirst, which is desire of the unquenchable or insatiable nature, unsatisfiable desire, that only leads to continual thirst, so wanting more and more of something. And chanda, which is desire for something more wholesome, like practicing meditation, like visiting the temple, like giving, like the quality of giving, generosity, like developing samadhi, all of these wholesome activities of body, speech and mind, which lead to ultimately release and letting go of those more material kinds of desires that one might have in worldly life, that are attributed sometimes towards the idea of success, bigger houses, newer cars, more money, more variety of food to eat, more drinks to drink, parties to go to, friends to associate with. All of this is let go of more easily when you see the simple satisfaction that can be gained through just something as very ordinary as the breath. And by observing that, you see it clearly. So very naturally, this can be seen when you're just watching breathing in, watching breathing out, as a natural quality of observation rather than intently trying to focus. If you're intently trying to focus on something and you're unable to do it, then you're trying too hard. Stop trying. Just sit and relax for some time. And then when your body has become a little bit more settled and comfortable, your mind has slowed down. And by the very nature of the breath itself, it will in turn also become more subtle and slow down. Then bring your awareness to that very fact. But when you sat, you were breathing quite fast. When you've sat for some time, the breath has now reduced to the bare minimum of air intake that's necessary for existence. Just noticing that is bringing your conscious awareness to the breath, to breathing as a whole. Try and come away from this idea of focusing at the very tip of the nose, this point of breath, and wanting to have your concentration there. That's a lot of hard work. Headache-inducing stuff, isn't it? No. Just sit here. All of the time I've been sitting here talking to you this morning, I've also been observing my own breathing in, my own breathing out, without consciously knowing that that is my intention, but because through so many hours and years of practice of doing that, it is my natural default. It becomes that. It becomes your earth, your grounding. It becomes your additional refuge to that of the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, whom are teaching that as your physical refuge in the physical body, with an action that is going on right now in this present moment. Each breath as you breathe in and then you exhale is in this moment only. You're not thinking about breathing in the last moment, the last breath, and you're not thinking about your next breath. It is the present moment here and now. When you can just see the breath as something as relaxing and simple and ordinary as that, it's no effort required. So you don't need to let go of a desire to that, but you don't also need to hang on to it. If you're holding something fragile, like a small bird or a pet, or even this cat is resting on my lap, I wouldn't think of wanting to squeeze it up tight and interrupt that. You'd have to pick her up very gently, or a little bird like this, holding it securely but gently. This is how we see our attention, our conscious awareness, rather than focus on the breath. But we do need to focus our minds, our thinking brains, our concentration needs to be concentrated in keeping our attention towards one thing, but not necessarily at one point. It can be breathing in general, whatever's most comfortable for you. Eventually you will just simply fall into a default space of, well, you know when you're breathing in, you know when you're breathing out. Whether that might be at the abdomen, whether it might be at the tip of the nose, it's neither here nor there. It really doesn't matter. You still know you're breathing in, you know you're breathing out. If you stop breathing, you're dead. So you're always breathing. It's always happening. It doesn't take much to bring your conscious awareness back to it. How's the coffee out there? Oh, the coffee's delicious in Sri Lanka. They grow coffee here, as well as tea. In fact, before it was a tea country, it was a coffee country. Then there was some problem of a virus or something, and I think it was the British replaced a lot of the coffee growing with tea growing. Anyway, that's by the by. Yes, delicious coffee here, and I'm fortunate enough to have enough offered to me. I can drink coffee any time of day because I have it black. I don't usually have sugar, but even if you were, that would be okay to have sugar in it. And it's also something we can, with just if we have hot water available, make it ourselves, because coffee itself, just ground coffee beans, is a powdered form. You can just put in a cup. It's considered one of the tonics that are acceptable, a tonic. So that and hot water is enough. Right, okay. Do you know if women stroke bhikkhunis can live a solitary life? I know you have said in the past that they can, but I heard a story where the Buddha forbade bhikkhunis to live in the forest or do solitary practice because of the increased risk of harm from other people. Do you know this story and if it's true? Well, yeah, I think it does say in the Vinaya Pitaka somewhere, and you'd need to ask really a bhikkhuni about this perhaps. But yeah, there's a story behind each of these Vinaya rules. There are thousands of Vinaya rules. They all come from an origin place. They come from a story. So there is a story, and I have heard it, but the Buddha did say this, and this was out of compassion for bhikkhunis, for females at the time, and I suppose even so in the modern age, being alone. Vulnerable and susceptible. Now, one might say that with the empowerment and equality and these ideas in place in this day and age, that's not necessarily so. I've met bhikkhunis or nuns, let's say. I'm not sure of exactly what ordination they'd had, whom are living alone throughout India, not perhaps so much in other countries, and living alone in the forest. The Buddha says to bhikkhus we can live alone in solitude under a tree in an empty building in a cave, or even in the open air, or we can live in a community. And I think in the Vinaya it does say, but bhikkhunis should live together in a community. I think it's a matter of choice. It's not so much breaking a rule, and it's up to each and one's own individual needs and requirements. Your question is, do I know if they can? I'm sure they can. If I can, then you can, or they can. And as I say, I have met one specific American lady a couple of years ago when I was in Bangalore. She came to stay at our monastery there, and she was travelling throughout that state, living alone in caves, and was very well supported by local communities. So she seemed, but she was not, she told me she was not a bhikkhuni. She was a 10 precept nun. So she was living with the support of others, so without money, and on alms food only. And by that sense, just living as a bhikkhu would also, and had no problems with that. So of course it's possible. And there have been many lay Buddhists, female lay practitioners, and one example would be Mei-chi Kao, who was a Mei-chi, so a 10 precept nun, because in Thailand they don't normally, or back then wouldn't have ordained her to a bhikkhuni status. She practiced alone and became fully enlightened, became an arahant. So there's another example. A lot of her life, that is. But no monks or nuns, bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, are ever that far from a community. We have to live within walking distance of a community, and you know, walking distance is subjective, but it needs to be, we need to be able to walk from dawn until a reasonable hour, half an hour at the most, really, 3/4 of an hour, to the nearest community in order to receive alms, get food, and then be able to return to our place of where we're staying, where our dwelling, to consume that food in the morning. So this all has to be done each and every day. So we need to live within reasonable distance of a community anyway. So we're never that far away from society and their support in that sense. We're coping already so far with these ants. And I see them as nature's little vacuum cleaner. Whatever it is they're attracted to, they're presumably clearing up, eating, using, taking away with them. And when they part, all will be well. But what it can be, I'm not sure. Do you consider yourself a Dhutanga monk because of your stricter adherence to the Vinaya and your more ascetic practices? So the Dhutanga practices, there are 13. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. A lot of them are to do with the way we eat. But essentially, the ones I've adopted or used throughout all of my ordained life, and even prior to being a monk, are those of just having one set of robes, just eating one meal a day, just eating the food that's offered to me. So that's a few of them already. Just eating the food that's offered to me in my bowl, out of my bowl, and not accepting any food that's offered thereafter. That's another of the rules. Sleeping in lonely places outside and living in solitude is another. Walking on alms round each day to get that food is another. There are many. These aren't really that ascetic. They're ordinary bhikkhu practices if you're living alone or you're living in solitude, because they're a requirement of being able to live at all. We need to eat. But of course you could have many sets of robes. There are Vinaya rules pertaining to that, but it doesn't mean that with certain exceptions you can't have more than one set. I take them literally because I've found them to be very geared up towards this practice of living the simplest life possible. So I don't consider my ascetic practices that. I don't consider them ascetic or indeed that austere. But that's possibly because I've got used to them. Oh, sleeping on just the floor without any additional mattresses, even with the termites surrounding such places. I don't consider that austere or that ascetic because I've become used to it over the years. But certainly makes for a simpler way of life. Do I consider myself a Dhutanga monk? There is not really Dhutanga monks. They're called, we would refer to monks whose main practice is working on the kilesas as kamatana monks, which Pali word kamatana means working monks. So I would refer to myself as a kamatana monk. I'm working on my kilesas, and the best way to work on one's kilesas is to have the simplest life possible, and therefore adopting the most ascetic practices the Buddha allows us to adopt and practice and still be a bhikkhu. And they are some of those 13 Dhutanga practices. Dhutanga is also translated or used in the abbreviated form of Tudong in Thailand as Tudong monks. They are wandering ascetics. They're always walking. So Tudong is shortened of Dhutanga. That often is referred to as just a monk that's walking from one place to another. The practice of going on Tudong is to walk from one place to another. But really it comes from the Dhutanga practices of walking as I do each morning on alms round, but not any longer from one place to another, because I'm well supported in this one location. But it was my original intention to be on Tudong here, or Dhutanga, to walk from one place to another. So do I consider myself? I don't really consider myself anything, just doing my best to practice within the parameters of the Noble Eightfold Path, and having adapted and then adapted to living the more austere life, I suppose, in these so-called ascetic practices, Dhutanga practices of the 13 Dhutanga practices that the Buddha allowed. Trying to think of one that I don't. See, one of the Dhutanga practices, Nisichik, which is when the non-lying down Dhutanga practice, for instance. Well, I don't practice that one. I can't do it. I do have to lie down at some stage, even if it's only to sleep. But even during the day, sometimes I might just lie down on the floor on my back for a rest, not to sleep for hours, but just for 10 or 15 minutes change of posture, as opposed to maybe walking or something like that. So there is one of the Dhutanga practices, Nisichik, which means never to lie down. It's not Nisichik, I think that's again, Thai derivative of the word. I can't remember the Pali word for that particular Dhutanga practice. I do have the list somewhere and often refer to it, but I won't just try and dig it up now. Just to suffice to say, I've covered half of those at least in what I've just said there, with the exception of that one. I like to lie down, even if it's just there occasionally, especially at night, to get my four, possibly, to 5 hours, maybe even 6 hours sleep at night. But I think 6 is pushing it a bit, but there we are, let's see. So, moving on. This is my apologies if this is a disjointed talk today. I'm fascinated more than anything by this flurry of insects, which has reduced now to a trickle. So they've got what they wanted, whatever that was, and now they're heading back. Now I do have my meal sitting just behind me there, more or less where I'm sitting now, but a few feet back on this mat. But from my bowl, there's never any real spillage or cause for any sweet things to get on the floor to attract such things, and they're not actually going in that direction. So I'm pretty sure it's not that. And I always have a very good clean up afterwards anyway. That's when I sweep this room thoroughly every day. Okay. Is it possible to live in the same present moment as one's past life? No, because that was a different... Each moment is each moment. So we must... there may be parallel universes and all of these other kind of ideas, but I don't know anything about that. It's actually quite difficult to live and be really present in the present moment here and now. If you can establish that, and that degree of mindfulness throughout all of your waking hours, you would have attained to such a high level of practice and mindfulness, I'm sure you will be able to experience all manner of other phenomena and abilities. Even psychic abilities may be possible. So this is the practice of mindfulness in the present moment, here and now. So certainly not thinking about the past or the future, and therefore that would include moments in present or past lives. There may be moments for comparison. You may do something for the first time, but feel quite comfortable in doing that activity as if you've almost done it once before. You've already got this sort of inherent ability, inclination, to be able to do whatever it is, this activity, as if you had already been practicing it previously. And it doesn't feel like new to you. This could be vague memory or reminiscent of a past life. But that's still happening. All of what's happening is as a result of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch and think about. Our five khandhas, our observation coming from rupa, our six senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching and thinking, through feelings resulting from that, vedana, through recognition, sanya, through mental formation, sankhara, and vijnana, sense consciousness of those six senses. All of we're experiencing in the present moment, here and now, is as a result of those. What's observing it is conditioned by those, our actions as a result of those, the citta. Now, it isn't to say that that citta isn't also conditioned by previous lives. Of course it is. It's what resulted through karma to its rebirth into this life. But this is a whole other area of discussion. Once you attain to this supra-mundane idea of understanding and wisdom, in that you have gone beyond the mere understanding of the Four Noble Truths and anicca, dukkha and anatta, to seeing everything clearly in the present moment as just that, from an observational point of view, pure mindfulness, you will be able to extend throughout all of your daily activities and develop all of these qualities and, as I say, even some recollection of the past. But our intention must be, through this practice, in the present moment, here and now. Do all of our past lives lead to one emergence from the state of nibbana? So you're kind of indicating that there's some parallel thing going on, or phenomena maybe. But yeah, all of our past lives result in this birth into this life. The past lives have gone, can be forgotten about. What is happening is now, in the present moment. Even the last moment is gone and can be forgotten about. The next moment might be parinibbana. You might reach enlightenment and attain to arahantship, the final stage of enlightenment, and this thinking brain and this physical body dies, having attained to nibbana. This is parinibbana, no more rebirth. So in a sense, all your previous lives have resulted in the good karma to practice well, to achieve that or to attain to that state of enlightenment, arahantship and parinibbana. Will the Buddha look into his past lives and see all lives leading inevitably towards his feet to Buddhahood? Well, he could recount, on enlightenment, he could recount all of his past lives, but he didn't have to see. It's logical his past lives led to where he was at that moment. This is, as long as you're talking about just their not parallel existences, which is what it kind of implies. Maybe you're not, maybe I'm just imagining that, but certainly, yeah, one step comes before the next and the next. One moment leads to the next moment and the next. In which monastery you live in India? Well, I don't. I'm living here in Sri Lanka, not in a monastery, but under the supervision of my monastery where, if I'm in India, I would stay, which is the Mahabodhi Society in Bangalore, Karnataka, South India. But I don't live there. I live here in Sri Lanka, in this small kuti, or this vihara, a little house for a monk, that is, alone, practicing in solitude. Okay. What do you think about shunyata, emptiness, philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism? Can we follow shunyata as a Theravada Buddhist? Well, in Pali, so that shunyata I think must be the Sanskrit word for sunyata. And indeed, yes, sunyata is a state of mind being emptiness. Now, I described emptiness, and it is very much a part of Theravada Buddhism and the practice. One might, in the Pali Canon, consider, when looking at the Abhidharma, it is explaining the steps towards this state of mind being sunyata, emptiness. A highly attained state of mind, but can too, like Nibbana, be glimpsed and appreciate when understood fully what it is. When we use the word emptiness, so just differentiating between the two words, Sanskrit shunyata, Mahayana, sunyata, Pali, Theravada. In this sense, I think they mean the same thing. But you say emptiness as the translation, as everyone would. And I would describe sunyata as emptiness. The problem with emptiness, it implies a container that is empty. So like a cup, a bucket, a box with four walls or sides being empty. Whereas sunyata, emptiness, is more like ultimate infinite spaciousness. So if we go down to our infinitely smallest level of understanding in terms of our makeup, we're made of solidity, liquidity, or solidity, liquidity, gaseousness, and space. So we have solid elements, liquid, gas, and they're all floating about in space. And I suppose in an atomic level, there is still like protons and neutrons, but they're all in space. And then on the biggest level, the whole universe is floating about in space. So there's all of this space, and most of which in space is empty. A huge void out there of emptiness, which you can look out and gaze into the sky at night and see vast distances of space between us and the nearest star or the nearest planet or whatever. This is all space, but there's also space within us. So spaciousness itself isn't within a container. You can't take the whole entire universe and whatever that's in, and then whatever that's in again, and put it in a box or in a container. So sunyata is emptiness, yes, but without the container. So take away the walls, take away the lids, the container, and think of ultimate infinite spaciousness as sunyata. And in meditation, when one is separated from, secluded from physical feelings, mental emotions, so thought even, one is abiding in ultimate spaciousness or emptiness, sunyata, not through a lack of anything being in the container, but through a lack of any impurity, disturbance, or walls to that container. Ultimate spaciousness, to the extent of your very atoms being at one, and don't get all confused with other philosophies here, but at one with all of that spaciousness in the universe, giving us an insight into truly that idea of not self, physically speaking, not self, but also that idea, mentally speaking, of knowing that these physical bodies and thinking brain are not what we are, not a self, but empty of any self. This is a way of coming to the understanding of anatta, of not self. So sunyata is considered both, I think, in both traditions, perhaps the northern school and the southern schools of Buddhism, as a state of mind, a state of emptiness, and that to be enjoyed. Also is, whilst unawakened, also could be mistaken or considered as very close to a glimpse of nibbana. For want of a better word or a better way to describe nibbana, because having not, if one hasn't experienced nibbana, even if one has experienced nibbana, it not being of this conditioned world cannot be described, whereas ultimate spaciousness and emptiness in that sense is describable as the lack of anything to disturb it, the lack of any impurity, any physical feeling, any mental thought, is that state of sunyata. So yes, it is a Theravada understanding, philosophy, idea also. Which jhana state have you experienced? Tell your experience. So monks don't discuss their own attainments, but more importantly, don't you worry about other people's attainments, because it is your own attainments that you need to be practicing towards developing. The Buddha himself said, don't take my word for it, don't believe me. Go, practice yourself, and see for yourself. So we know the Buddha is fully enlightened, we know he's fully attained, and out of compassion remained to teach for 45 years for our benefit. But that knowledge gives us the confidence in those teachings, but even so, he's still not saying, just because of that, believe me, it is so. He is saying, this is not so. You go and experience for yourself. So don't believe me, sunyata is a state of mind you can experience. Go and try it yourself. Don't believe me, you can glimpse nibbana if you attain to jhana. Go and experience it yourself. So whether or not I have or I haven't is neither here nor there. But you can rather assume that monks practicing meditation for many hours a day, living in solitude, and if that is their goal, will be attaining to levels of practice that is described throughout the suttas and is described by disciples and subsequent generations in that lineage from the Sangha, because this is the objective of our renunciation. This is the objective of our practice. Now that mightn't always be the case. There are rooms in different cultures and areas that allow for some flexibility. Perhaps people aren't practicing meditation so much, even monks, and they're taking the intellectual path and learning and teaching and maybe having other useful activities within samsara itself. But there are those who've stepped really outside of that, living alone and practicing, that is all we do. How to become sotapanna and how we are able to know we have become sotapanna or anagami. Sakadagami, anagami. So the 4 levels of enlightenment. Sotapanna the first, Sakadagami, anagami, stream entry, not once returner, non-returner, and arahant, fully enlightened. So a stream enterer, sotapanna, the first stage of enlightenment, is someone who has no doubt in the teachings of the Buddha, has relinquished all view of self, Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view, has a full understanding of not self, appreciates all of the characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, karma, that leads to rebirth. So all the actions of our body, speech and mind will result in vipaka, results of karma, and we are the heirs to that karma. and no doubt in that, and have relinquished all rites and rituals, so no longer believe that there are any practices. There are devotional practices that mindfully reflect upon qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, mindfully act upon generosity and giving, and reflect upon the teachings of the Buddhas, like the Paritas, the Suttas, and so on and so forth when chanted. But these are not alone given to produce good results. They're reflections and they're mindful interactions with the scriptures. They're not magical blessings, they're not magical chants. Even blessings are mutual good wishes. They're not magical potions to bring about good luck. The relinquishments of rites and rituals. So this is the first stage of enlightenment. If you can say to yourself you have no belief or knowledge or understanding, you know that you are of no substance, you are merely the five khandhas. You have no self, you know that. You know there's karma. You understand the Four Noble Truths, you're practicing within the Noble Eightfold Path, and you're not practicing any rites and rituals or devotional practices that you believe bring you good luck or good fortune, other than through your own good actions and activities. If you are of that understanding, then you would have probably attained to the level of stream entry, sotapanna. Then the second two, and I might have got them the wrong way round, sakadagami and anagami, stream once returner and non-returner, are a gradual reduction in greed and a gradual reduction in hatred, or a gradual reduction in sensual desire, a gradual reduction in aversion. The sort of first and second of the five hindrances, but also the results of greed and hatred in the three kilesas. These are gradually reduced until they're non-existent in the next two, so they're less clearly defined. But then the fourth, arahantship, there is no more greed, there is no more aversion or ill will, disliking of. However, there could still be some anger remaining. That is the feeling of frustration resulting of not getting things absolutely right, because there is still some conceit remaining as a non-returner, anagami, that has to be completely eradicated so that there is no further delusion. Therefore, greed, hatred and delusion are all cut off by the roots, and then arahantship is attained to. In arahantship, there is no greed, no hatred, no delusion. All conceit, and in Buddhism that is being better than, equal to, or worse than. It's not just better than. Any comparison to another is gone, and anger, or anger, frustration, disappointment, gone, eradicated. This is arahantship. This is enlightenment. This is what leads to no attachment to the self, because of course you understand right from the off, first stage of enlightenment, there is no self. But you still have experience. You still are alive. And there is no more attachment to that. This can only be through wanting, greed, not wanting, hatred, and confusion, delusion. These having been eradicated, there is no further rebirth. And there is therefore at parinibbana, at the death of an arahant, parinibbana, the attainment to nibbana, so no further rebirth. You will know, and you will no longer have that question. How to become sotapanna? That was the question. Sorry, I skipped the first bit. You practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Keep the 5 precepts, practice meditation, develop wisdom. There's only one way, no other. It's the Noble Eightfold Path, practiced holistically, all of it, not just a bit of it, all of it. Okay, timing-wise, I think we must have nearly finished. Rosie's so comfortable, I'll carry on. I was just wondering, if you follow, accept, or even care about everything that is taught in the Tripitaka, And the analysis of the scriptures, so the Tipitaka, or the analysis of the, I think you mean scriptures, and the underlying nature of reality and mind taught in the higher doctrine of the Abhidharma. Oh, I was just wondering if I wonder all those, if I follow, accept, or even care about all those things. Were you? If not, why do you choose not to follow these other teachings of the Buddha and his disciples? So, the Tipitaka is 3 baskets, is what it literally means, which the first basket is the Vinaya Pitaka. The rules, guidelines, code and conduct as set down by the Buddha, discussed and practiced throughout 45 years of teaching his disciples, coming across, establishing the Sangha, all of the little problems that occurred, and devising these guidelines and rules, thousands of rules in the Vinaya, to live by. That is for the Sangha. And I thoroughly accept, as they were tried and tested and practiced by the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha of the Buddha himself, his disciples and himself, that they are unvariable, immovable. So I totally accept that. So there's no question about that. And from there come our 227 precepts as a bhikkhu, by which we have to adhere to. Occasionally, some of the very minor ones we might break, and we can confess to another bhikkhu and make a determination not to break them again. But they're there for our own benefit, to assist with our practice, to benefit our practice, to keep intact the core precepts of doing no harm, and the disrobable precepts of, say, killing or engaging in sexual activity of any kind, stealing anything valuable, and this kind of thing. So those things that will preclude us from continuing as a monk. So they're all set in stone, really, as guidelines, but also the code of conduct for us to follow without fail in order to maintain the ability to practice in this form as a bhikkhu. So I very much adhere and respect and value those guidelines. The Sutta Pitaka is the second basket, which are the words, the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha's desanas, his Dharma talks, if you like, all communicated by word of mouth, and then sometime after the parinibbana of the Buddha, approximately in the first council, so within the first 100 years of his parinibbana, were all written down and now brought about to us in this Pali canon, in the Tipitaka, the 3 baskets, as that Vinaya Pitaka, and the Sutta Pitaka. And those teachings are what I follow and fully take as my teachings as the word of the Buddha. So totally I'm with you on that one. So that's not in question. And then the Abhidharma, which came sometime afterwards and has varying descriptions and understandings of, is a more in-depth analysis of those suttas and what the Buddha taught, written by subsequently to the Sutta Pitaka, which is as close as we can get to the word of the Buddha. The Abhidharma was written down subsequently as to being in that lineage, probably monks and Sangha whom were interpreting those teachings of the Buddha. A more in-depth analysis of those teachings of the Buddha contained in the Sutta Pitaka. So although that is something I've read and I've been on courses about, I have chosen to leave aside from the point of view that I find that all that is necessary for my practice is contained in the Vinaya Pitaka and the Sutta Pitaka, the first 2 baskets. So that is why I leave the 3rd basket, the Abhidharma, that Pitaka, the 3rd basket, aside for people whom are more interested in talking about what the Buddha taught, analysing what the Buddha taught, than simply sitting and practicing, doing what the Buddha taught us to do as monks. So, if not, why do you choose not to follow these other teachings of the Buddha and his disciples? Because they are the teachings of his disciples and not the word of the Buddha, which are all contained in the Sutta Pitaka. So I hope that explains it. So I don't renounce the Abhidharma. It's very supportive of the Sutta Pitaka for those that need it and are interested in it. But for anyone to have a very thorough understanding of the Abhidharma, they would have to dedicate many years of study, not only practice, but study to that aim, to that goal, to that attainment, to really fully have a proper understanding of Abhidharma. And there are people with PhDs in Abhidharma, which is all well and good. But if they're not practicing, if they're not meditating, this will not lead them towards Nibbana. If you can be attained towards Nibbana intellectually, then maybe so. But this is not what the Buddha teaches us. He teaches us to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. And that is enough. So I've chosen to take that route in terms of my practice, without any criticism or any, not to the detriment of its validity, the Abhidharma itself. I just find it unnecessary to delve into it any further than I have already. I hope I understood your question correctly and answered it accordingly. What if someone wants to get ordained under you? Is it possible? No, because I'm not qualified to ordain anyone. There isn't a specific qualification. Actually, there might be in some cultures and countries. But one has to at least have been a bhikkhu for, I think it's 12 years, but you'd have to at least have been a bhikkhu for terra, so 10 years. It's my understanding that preceptors, those that offer ordination, are usually bhikkhus that are mahateras. So they've been bhikkhus for 20 years, so 2 times 10, so mahateras. So I was ordained under the preceptorship, or my upajjhaya is a mahatera. So he's been a bhikkhu for something like 40 odd years. So they need to be very experienced and also willing to take you on as dependents. And I'm neither in a position to do so or feel I'm capable of doing so, taking on anyone underneath me as a dependent. So I leave that to those that know better, and also are living within a sangha of other ordained monks. You need 4 other mahateras in order to be able to ordain other bhikkhus, new bhikkhus. So you need at least a quorum, which is 5. So you can't just, as a bhikkhu, go and ordain another bhikkhu like that. It's a very established order of things, the way it's done. So is it possible? No. No. You need to go to some established monastery and find monks there. And on that note, I think I should, in this time we've spoken, the little things, whatever they were, ants or termites, maybe I will never know. They seem to have gone their own separate way, and maybe I've spoken a little bit longer than usual, but that's quite good. It's given them the opportunity to do that. And on that note, until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu. So don't sit down again, Rosie, because we're going to get up and go now. I thought I was. Okay. So very gently, you go this way. There's a good girl. You can come and sit on my lap again in a moment. That's a good girl. You can stay here. Okay. Try not to get on your tail there. Okay.